Can anything be learned from the Bible relative to the period of the Second Advent? Is a question unsettled in many minds. This is a grave inquiry, and from the nature of the subject is worthy of close investigation and candid answer. How did Christ himself treat the subject? When the disciples inquired, "What shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?" he did not reprove them for prying into that which was purposely hidden from all men. After all, when we go back in history, when the destruction of the world came in Noah's day, didn't Noah tell them exactly what was going to happen? Wasn't even the time predicted, 120 years? No, he answered them in the most definite manner. He even states that there should be signs of that events and adds, "When you shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors." The simple fact that the Lord mentions signs of his second advent is the best proof possible that his people were not to remain ignorant of the relative nearness of the event. And to this evidence, his declaration that when these signs should be seen, his people should know that it was near, even at the doors, and the case becomes an exceedingly strong one. But of that day and that hour knoweth no man, he continues. No, not the angels which are in heaven, neither the Son, but the Father. If the text proves that men will know nothing of the period of the second advent, and it also proves that angels will know nothing of it, and also that the Son will know nothing of it. Till the event takes place, this position proves too much. And I agree with him. Because if Jesus is one with the Father and is fully God, then he must know the time. So let's see how he resolves this. So till the event takes place, this position proves too much, therefore proves nothing to the point. Christ will know of the period of his second advent to this world. The holy angels who wait around the throne of heaven to receive messages relative to the part they act in the salvation of men will know of the time of the closing events of salvation, and so will the waiting, watching people of God understand. Now, is he being presumptuous? Let's continue. An old English version of the passage reads, "But that day and hour no man maketh known, neither the angels which are in heaven, neither the Son, but the Father." This is the correct reading according to several of the ablest critics of the age. The word know is used in the same sense here that it is by Paul in 1 Corinthians 2 verse 2. "For I determined not to know," can be read make known, "anything among you save Jesus Christ and him crucified. Men will not make known the day and the hour, angels will not make it known, neither will the Son, but the Father will make it known." There's a quote in the Spirit of Prophecy where in early writings she says, as the people of God looked up and waited for the coming of Christ, the time was made known by the voice in heaven, the Father making the time known. So we do not know the day or the hour. He continues and says Campbell, McKnight argues that the term know is here used as a causative. In the Hebrew sense of the conjugation, he feels that is to make known. Christ's answer is just equivalent to saying, the Father will make it known when it pleases him, but he has not authorized man, angel, nor the Son to make it known. Just in this sense, Paul uses the term know. In Corinthians 2:2, "I came to you making known the testimony of God, for I determined to make known nothing amongst you but a crucified Christ." Albert Barnes, in his notes on the gospel, says, others have said that the verb rendered knoweth means sometimes to make known or to reveal, and that the passage means that day and hour none maketh known, neither the angels nor the Son, but the Father. It is true the word has sometimes that meaning, as in 1 Corinthians 2, verse 2. That makes a lot of sense. Because how would it be possible that he who is very God and had no beginning, Jesus Christ, would not know the hour of his coming? Now, I'm going to venture onto a ground that is highly problematic. But if we stick closely to the spirit of prophecy, is there anything that we can glean from this? And this is the concept of the great cosmic week. In other words, 6 days, which become then a day for 1,000 years, 6,000 years plus 1,000 years for the millennium. Now, this is a concept that has been around for a very, very long time. And we find in Psalms 90 and in 2 Peter the following statement. Psalms 90 verse 4. For 1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday when it is past, and as a watch in the night. 2 Peter 3 verse 8. But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. The book of Revelation refers to the 1,000-year millennium period 6 times. Let's look at one of those verses. Revelation 20 verse 4. And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus, and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads, or in their hands, and they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. So there are 6 statements regarding this 1,000-year period. Some of them talk about the devil that was bound 1,000 years. Now, Robert Johnston, the chair of the New Testament department at the Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary of Andrews University, wrote an article on the subject, which can be found at this webpage. And in this article, he shows that some of the early Advent pioneers, most notably Jane Andrews, were actually firm believers in this principle, but that this idea was later discarded by some, including Uriah Smith. It's interesting that as late as 1899, Adventist publications stated firmly that the end would be sometime around the year 1900. This belief that the end will come sometime during a somewhat extended period with an end point can be called soft time setting, as contrasted with the setting of a definite firm date, hard time setting. So this is the theology. And this theology, although it was used by the early pioneers, was basically discarded and has, received some very poor press, and people have shied away from it. Now, my question is, does the spirit of prophecy throw any light on the subject? In other words, I know that Jane Andrews believed it, but does the spirit of prophecy throw any light on the subject? And we will look at some of these, and this is not time setting. I'm not time setting at all. I'm just looking at what does the spirit of prophecy say. And I'm not talking about the time or the hour. And I'm not interested in any prophetic interpretation where we take the prophetic times of Daniel, for example, and make them literal times in our dates. That is a system of futurism which is not in harmony with the Bible. We're looking at this cosmic time, and I want to know, what does the spirit of prophecy say? There are in fact 74 if you count the compilations, 6,000-year statements and 41 4,000-year statements in her writings. Now, how did I get interested in this? My interest in these statements comes from my study of creation versus evolution, particularly with regard to the age of the earth. However, it was proposed by some scholars that these times are not definitive and simply meant, in other words, these 42 or 74 statements on 6,000 and the 41 on 4,000 years, that they were not meant definitively, and that they actually meant since the beginning, during Old Testament times. But at least one of these was definitive, when she stated, the world is now only about 6,000 years old. That's in 3 Spiritual Gifts, page 92. Now, Ellen White uses the phrases about 6,000 years 13 times. She uses the statement almost 6,000 years once, and she uses the statement nearly 6,000 years 12 times. But there are 3 where she states more than 6,000 or over 6,000. And the rest of the statements just say for 6,000 years. Now, I was part of a delegation in the church where we discussed this issue of creation. And I attended a lecture by some of our prominent theologians where this whole issue was discussed. And it was stated quite categorically that none of these statements on the 6,000 years can be used to determine the age of the earth. Now, I'd just come into this church, and I'd been an evolutionist, and my whole world was turned upside down as a consequence of the study of the prophecies, and then eventually also a study of our origins and evolution, which of course entailed the age of the earth. And as I listened to these lectures, which by the way are also written in journals, these same sentiments, I was confronted with this idea that there are many statements which say that the earth is about 6,000 years old, or almost 6,000 years old, or nearly 6,000 years old. But there are these 3 statements which state more than 6,000. And therefore this was presented as proof that you cannot take them as definitive. Now, this concerned me. And moreover, it was stated in those publications and in those lectures that where these statements are made about the 6,000 years, it's probable that she was influenced by the margin of the King James Version, which contained Ussher's dates, and therefore in the concept of the stream of time or the time period where they were living, it was logical for her to just adopt these statements of 6,000 years. And it bothered me. So I put up my hand in that meeting and I said, now, I just have one problem. And this is the problem. If she was influenced by the margin of the King James Version to say that it was 6,000 years, then what else could have influenced her in terms of all her other statements in the spirit of prophecy? Can we then still trust the spirit of prophecy as an inspired source, or shall we just lay it aside? Well, there was another document which was then discussed, and the issue was explained as followed. Yes, we believe that she was inspired, but that she didn't have the same authority as the other prophets. She was as inspired, but didn't have the same authority. Now, that's an oxymoron. how can you be inspired and not have the same authority? Does God speak through inspiration with authority only through some people and with no authority through other people? Was this exegetical or was this homiletical? That was the question. Well, it bothered me because it disturbed my apple cart when it came to the age of the earth. I wasn't thinking at all about what we are discussing today. It was at that time just the age of the earth. And so when I came back to my home in South Africa and went back to my university and started working on my lectures on evolution and creation, this thought bothered me. And I prayed and I said, Lord, this makes no sense to me. How can it be almost or about 6,000 in one place and more than 6,000 in another? If there is anything wrong with this, then you must show me, because else I will have to discard virtually everything she wrote. Because if she's influenced by every wind of doctrine out there, then how can I trust the spirit of prophecy? And I filed it in file 13 and left it. And a few years later, a colporteur gave me a little pile of pamphlets. And I read them and I went through them. And suddenly I almost fell off my chair, because there was one particular pamphlet that caught my attention. But before I get there, here's one statement that I found interesting from the biographies. In other words, this is not Ellen G. White writing, because it was stated that Ellen White never ever received any visions regarding the time that this controversy or the age of the earth was concerned. But here in the biographical volumes, 1 Bio 366, we read the following. The vision of Lovetts Grove, Ohio, on a Sunday afternoon in mid-March 1858 was one of great importance. In this, the theme of the great controversy between Christ and his angels on the one side and Satan and his angels on the other was seen as one continuous and closely linked chain of events spanning 6,000 years. So in other words, the great controversy vision actually had this time frame. It's interesting, this vision has put Seventh-day Adventists in a unique position with clear-cut views of the working of providence in the history of our world. A viewpoint quite different from that held by secular historians who see events of history as the interplay between the actions of men, often seemingly the result of chance or natural developments. In other words, this vision and others of the great conflict of the ages yield a philosophy of history that answers many questions in prophetic forecast, gives the assurance of the final victory of good over evil. So it was very definitive. So I would like to look at some of these statements. And what was this pamphlet that I had received? What about the more than or over 6,000 years? Well, this pamphlet had the following information. Warren H. Johns, the seminary librarian at Andrews University, researched this issue, and he came to the conclusion that Ellen White believed that there were exactly 4,000 years between the creation of man and the birth of Christ, and that her consistent position was that the world was less than 6,000 years old. Warren H. Johns, Ellen G. White, and Biblical Chronology, Ministry, April 1984, pages 20 to 22. Now, personally, I do not quite agree with his statement over here, and we'll talk about why in a moment. Because he takes it to the birth of Christ, and I believe that is not the correct way in which she used it. But be that as it may, she clearly believed the 4,000 and the 6,000. Now, what about those three statements? Well, the first one is found in Historical Sketches, page 133. More than 6,000 years of continual practice, referring to the devil's arts. This statement does not deal with the age of the earth or the time since the fall, but with how long the devil has been in the deception business. And of course, deception started in heaven, which could have been hundreds of years for all we know. So it has nothing to do with the age of the earth. It has to do with how long the devil has been in the deception business. And after all, he deceived a third of the angels. So that takes care of that one statement. The second statement is from the story of Jesus, and it says, "And for more than 6,000 years, in its forms of beauty and gifts of sustenance, the earth has borne witness of the Creator's love." Now that sounds like it could be problematic, but if you study it, this statement comes from the chapter, The Home of the Saved, and deals with a new earth, when the earth will be about 7,000 years old. So it has nothing to do with the 6,000 years period of sin. Now, the third statement is the most problematic. This statement comes from Christian Temperance and Bible Hygiene, page 154, and states, the continual transgression of man for over 6,000 years. Now, in 1977, Dr. Robert Gentry of Earth Science Associates contacted the White Estate regarding this statement and was told that this was a copying error and that the original first source from which it was taken was 3 Testimonies, page 491, 492, and did not contain the word over. Moreover, Ellen White did not use the word over when she used the earlier material to write the book Desire of Ages. So, in other words, the 3 statements do not negate Ellen White's stand that the earth is almost 6,000 years old. Now let's have a look and see exactly what the Spirit of Prophecy says. And again, I reiterate, I'm not time setting. I'm studying the Spirit of Prophecy. I want to know what the prophet said. I don't want to know what a theologian thinks the prophet thought or what influenced the prophet. I want to know, what did she say? So let's ask the question, according to the Spirit of Prophecy, how long will sin reign? Well, here is a statement. After 6,000 years of sin, the earth was renewed. The great plan of redemption, this comes from Adventist Home, results in fully bringing back the world into God's favor. All that was lost by sin is restored. Not only man, but the earth is redeemed to be the eternal abode of the obedient. For 6,000 years, Satan has struggled to maintain possession of the earth. Now God's original purpose in its creation is accomplished. The saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Now I want to come back to this statement at a later stage. But the point for discussion right here is that she definitively states that for 6,000 years, Satan has struggled to maintain possession of the earth. That is a very direct statement. So my question now is, where, according to the Spirit of Prophecy, are we in the stream of time? So when, according to the Spirit of Prophecy, will 6,000 years have elapsed since the fall of man? Well, let's start with the 4,000-year statements. At Christ's baptism, sin had reigned, according to the Spirit of Prophecy, 4,000 years. And that was in 27 AD. Let's make sure. Because there are so many of these talks out there which give dates, either calculating, as we saw, from the birth of Christ, or from the crucifixion, or from any time period in between. I want to know exactly. I don't want to know about. What does she say? So let's be careful in the way we approach it. Christ in the wilderness of temptation. Let's just stop there. What year was that? Christ entered the wilderness of temptation directly after his baptism, and that was in 27 AD. Let's make sure. Christ in the wilderness of temptation stood in Adam's place to bear the test he failed to endure. Here Christ overcame in the sinner's behalf 4,000 years after Adam turned his back upon the light of his home. So since the fall of Adam to the temptation in the wilderness, which took place in 27 AD, is the time period since the fall of Adam. Separated from the presence of God, the human family had been departing each successive generation further from the original purity, wisdom, and knowledge which Adam possessed in Eden. Christ bore the sins and the infirmities of the race as they existed when he came to the earth to help man. In behalf of the race, with the weaknesses of fallen man upon him, he was to stand the temptation of Satan upon all points on which man could be assailed. So exactly 4,000 years since the fall of Adam to the wilderness of temptation. Let's read another one. The Savior of the world has no controversy with Satan, who was expelled from heaven because he was no longer worthy of a place there. He who could influence the angels of God against their supreme ruler, against his Son, their loved commander, and enlist their sympathy for himself, was capable of any deception. For 4,000 years he had been warring against the government of God and had lost none of his skills or power to tempt and deceive. Again, here Satan was going to confront Jesus in the wilderness of temptation, and he'd had 4,000 years to contemplate how he was overcome Jesus as he had overcome Adam. Let's make sure. On Jordan's banks, the voice from heaven, attended by the manifestation from the excellent glory, proclaimed Christ to be the Son of the Eternal. That is the baptism of Jesus, where the voice from heaven came and said, "This is my beloved Son." So we have a date. It was 27 AD. Satan was to personally encounter the head of the kingdom, which he came to overthrow. If he failed, he knew that he was lost. Therefore, the power of his temptation was in accordance with the greatness of the object which he would lose or gain for 4,000 years. Now listen carefully. Ever since the declaration was made to Adam that the seed of the woman should bruise the serpent's head, he had been planning his manner of attack. We have precise times in this statement. From the fall of Adam up unto the wilderness experience of Jesus, exactly 4,000 years. In other words, until the baptism. Let us go to the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. When the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. Galatians 4, verse 4 and 5. When the fullness of time had come. We need to know what that is. The Savior's coming was foretold in Eden. When Adam and Eve first heard the promise, they looked for its speedy fulfillment. In other words, that promise that now had taken 4,000 years of time to be fulfilled. They joyfully welcomed their firstborn son, hoping that he might be the deliverer, but the fulfillment of the promise tarried. Those who first received it died without the sight. From the days of Enoch, the promise was repeated through patriarchs and prophets, keeping alive the hope of his appearing, and yet he came not. The prophecy of Daniel revealed the time of his advent. So the prophecy of Daniel revealed the time of his advent from the time that the promise was made that he would crush the serpent's head. But not all rightly interpreted the message. Century after century passed away, the voices of the prophets ceased. The hand of the oppressor was heavy upon Israel, and many were ready to exclaim, "The days are prolonged, and every vision faileth." Ezekiel 12, verse 22. So what were the conditions prevailing at the first coming of Christ? So we know a time now, exactly 4,000 years since the fall of Adam, according to the spirit of prophecy. Please note, not according to me, according to the spirit of prophecy, exactly 4,000 years to the baptism of Christ. Now, what were the conditions? When the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son. Providence had directed the movements of nations. Do you not think that God will direct through providence the movement of nations in our time? And the tide of human impulse and influence until the world was ripe for the coming of the deliverer. The nations were united under one government. That's an important point. It was the Roman system. One language was widely spoken and was everywhere recognized as the language of literature. From all lands, the Jews of the dispersion gathered to Jerusalem to the annual feasts. As these returned to the places of their sojourn, they could spread throughout the world the tidings of the Messiah's coming. So let's project to our time. The nations were united under one government. Not yet the case. One language was widely spoken, English, in our time. And the Jews were dispersed through all nations. God has his people dispersed through all the nations. We have many of these conditions. Genesis 11 verse 5. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower. This is the Tower of Babel, where humanity was united as one, which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. So this attempt to unify, God had interrupted. In the time when Jesus came, there was almost one nation ruling everywhere, and in the second coming, it could be the same. Well, let's have a look at this statement. And this is the Handelsblatt in Germany. And it's fascinating that they show the EU as the Tower of Babel with the waters rushing around it with the coronavirus catastrophe. And here in the corner it says, Wir brauchen eine globale Führung. We need a global leadership. We need to become one. We are building a Tower of Babel. Here they decided to build a city, Patriarchs and Prophets, page 118. And in it a tower of such stupendous height as should render it the wonder of the world. These enterprises were designed to prevent the people from scattering abroad in colonies. God had directed men to disperse throughout the earth, to replenish and subdue it, but these Babel builders determined to keep their community united in one body and to found a monarchy that should eventually embrace the whole earth. One king, one moral leader. Do we have such a figure where everybody flocks to him in Rome for moral guidance in the time that we are living in? Thus their city would become the metropolis of a universal empire. Its glory would command the admiration and homage of the world and render the founders illustrious. The magnificent tower reaching to the heavens was intended to stand as a monument of the power and wisdom of its builders, perpetuating their fame to the latest generation. Well, here is Yuval Noah Harari, a very famous author, and he said, we will have a totally different world after the coronavirus. And in this fight against the pandemic, we need one world leadership. Catholic Herald. God's plan is to unite all humanity, says the Pope. So the Pope is calling for this unity. Here is the Catholic Press, and it says the Pope wants all people to be united because of the corona pandemic. These are important signs which are leading up to exactly the conditions that the Bible describes at the first coming of Christ. Here is Gordon Brown, one of the former Prime Ministers of England. He calls for a global government to tackle coronavirus. The former Labour Prime Minister, who was at the center of the international effort to tackle the impact of the near meltdown of the banks in 2008, says we need a global governance. Is it only him? No. Angela Merkel asks for a new world order. These are the headlines that are screaming at us. Kissinger says even the US can't defeat COVID-19 alone. His solution, global new world government, of course. We need a new world always preaching about this. The man is 96 years old and he's still preaching his new world order. And the world will be different after coronavirus. And we will have the conditions that prevailed before. It might look different. I'm not interested in exactly what this new order will look like. George Bush Sr. said no nation will give up one iota of its sovereignty, but the communication and the way in which things will work will be different. Obama drops coronavirus bombshell. It's all due to climate change. And he's the one that supported the Pope when he came to give his speech. He is the one that made this issue prominent. And it's interesting that Erdogan said that he has a pact with Putin, and that Trump and Putin and him as a leader of the Middle East, they will create a new order. What that order looks like doesn't matter. We're looking at signs of the times. One of the great signs before the end is that Satan must impersonate Christ before the coming of the Lord. Matthew 24 verse 5, for many shall come in my name saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And 2 Corinthians 11:14, and no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. A power working from beneath is working to bring about the last great scenes in the drama. Satan coming as Christ, and working with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in those who are binding themselves together in secret societies. When I read this and I hear all these people talk about conspiracy theories, we're not dealing with conspiracy theories. We are dealing with prophetic fulfillment. As the crowning act in the great drama of deception, Satan himself will personate Christ. The church has long professed to look to the Savior's advent at the consumption of her hopes. Now the great deceiver will make it appear that Christ has come. In different parts of the earth, Satan will manifest himself amongst men as a majestic being of dazzling brightness, resembling the description of the Son of God given by John in the Revelation. This is a future prediction. The glory that surrounds him is unsurpassed by anything that mortal eyes have yet beheld. The shout of triumph rings out upon the air. Christ has come! Christ has come! The people prostrate themselves in adoration before him, while he lifts up his hands and pronounces a blessing upon them. This comes from the great controversy. As Christ blessed his disciples when he was upon earth, his voice is soft and subdued, yet full of melody. In gentle, compassionate tones, he presents some of the same gracious heavenly truths which the Savior uttered. He heals the diseases of the people, and then, in his assumed character of Christ, he claims to have changed the Sabbath to Sunday and commands all to hallow the day which he has blessed. He declares that those who persist in keeping holy the seventh day are blaspheming his name by refusing to listen to his angels sent to them with light and truth. This is the strong, almost overmastering delusion, like the Samaritans who were deceived by Simon Magus. The multitudes from the least to the greatest give heed to these sorceries, saying, "This is the great power of God." So in other words, the issue of papal legislation must already have been discussed when this appearance takes place. How close are we to this appearance? Well, isn't it fascinating that the Israeli rabbi says he's already holding meetings with the Messiah, and this is from February the 20th, 2020, this year. Rabbi Yaakov Zicholz on Sunday told religious broadcaster Radio 2000 that Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky recently told him that he, Kanievsky, is already in direct contact with the Messiah. To understand why religious Jews are taking this seriously, it's important to know that Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky is considered one of the 2 or 3 top rabbis of the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community in Israel. And Rabbi Zicholz says that Kanievsky and others of the mystical concealed rabbis have now tasked him with informing the public of the Messiah's imminent arrival. Rabbi Zicholz began his explosive 3-hour interview with a warning. The process of redemption is about to start happening, very quickly and at a fast pace. The last events shall be rapid ones. It is important that people remain calm and steady to act properly in the right time. There is a potential Messiah in every generation, and there are righteous men who know precisely who it is. This is, of course, true in this generation. Getting the word out now that the Messiah is closer than ever is a matter of life and death. Haven't you heard of Gog and Magog? That is what's going to happen very soon. Right now, the situation is explosive, more than you can possibly imagine. Everyone needs to know whether they are on the inside or they're going to be left out. And then he went on to reiterate that a certain Rabbi Dob Cook, as everybody knows, is a righteous man. He is one of the greatest men of our generation. 10 years ago, when Israel was suffering from horrible drought, someone asked Rabbi Cook when the Sea of Galilee will be full. Recounted Rabbi Zicholz. Rabbi Cook responded that when the Messiah arrives, the Sea of Galilee will be full. In a few weeks, the Sea of Galilee will be full for the first time since Rabbi Cook made this statement. Then I also proclaimed that Netanyahu will be the final president. Now, I'm not using this as time setting. I'm using this as background information that the conditions described in the scriptures and the spirit of prophecy are ripe. They are there for us to perceive. I do not for one moment believe in the Israel vision. I'm just looking at the signs which we are informed to do and trying to bring a message. So my question is this. If Christ came at exactly 4,000 years after Adam sinned, and if we add 2,000 years, could the world end in 2027 according to this calculation? Because remember, Christ came 27 AD when 4,000 years since the fall of Adam had expired, and add to that the 2,000 years to make the 6,000 would bring us to the year 2027. But before I go there, and remember, I am not time setting, I'm merely quoting the spirit of prophecy. I want to look at that statement that I referred to earlier. And I said we would come back to it. Let's look at it carefully. It's the statement about after 6,000 years of sin, the earth was renewed. The great plan of redemption results in fully bringing back the world into God's favor. All that was lost by sin is restored. Not only man, but the earth is redeemed to be the eternal abode of the obedient. For 6,000 years, Satan had struggled to maintain possession of the earth. Now, God's original purpose in its creation is accomplished. The saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever, even forever and ever. What is the context of this statement? Well, it is in the context of the final restoration, when the saints will possess this kingdom and the earth forever and ever. So it is after the millennium, when the earth will be restored to its original. But even after the millennium, the time period that Satan had been warring against this government was 6,000 years. For 6,000 years, Satan had struggled to maintain possession of the earth. So it's the time frame of his total struggle. Now remember, during the millennium, he cannot struggle. He's bound for 1,000 years. He is inactivated. He has no power to do anything. So how do we understand this? Let us look at Satan preparing for the final battle. This is me writing. So when the wicked are raised, Satan must have some time to prepare them for battle. If 2027 is the end of the 6,000-year period of warring against God, then this would exclude the time of preparation required after the wicked are raised. Is it possible, I'm just asking the question, that a time could be cut off from the 6,000 years before 2027? If so, then Christ must come sometime before 2027 to allow this, if we take the prophecies in the spirit of prophecy as definitive in terms of time. Now Romans 9 verse 28 says, "For he will finish the work and cut it short in righteousness, because a short work will the Lord make upon the earth." So there will be a time when he will cut it short. Here's another statement in the spirit of prophecy: those who are not interested in the cause of God on earth can never sing the song of redeeming love above. I saw that the quick work that God was doing on the earth would soon be cut short in righteousness, and that the messengers must speed swiftly on their way to search out the scattered flock. We have a work to do. I want to remind you again, this is not time setting, but let the Bible and the spirit of prophecy speak for themselves. Revelation 20 verse 3 says about the devil, "And cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled." So here is 1,000 years of rest, complete. And after that, he must be loosed a little season. So after the 1,000 years, there is a little season when he will be active again. But by the time you get to the restoration of the earth, Satan will have been active for exactly 6,000 years, according to that previous statement. So now what about this little season? "And when the 1,000 years are expired," 20 verse 7, "Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and he can again commence to deceive the nations." That's the biblical version. Now let's go to the spirit of prophecy. This is now after the 1,000 years. The city of God has come down onto this earth, A plain has been created where Jesus' feet land on the Mount of Olives, and the city comes down on this purified area. What happens then? Then Jesus and all the retinue of holy angels and all the redeemed saints left the city. The angels surrounded their commander and escorted him on his way, and the train of redeemed saints followed. Then in terrible, fearful majesty, Jesus called forth the wicked dead. And they came up with the same feeble, sickly bodies that went into the grave. What a spectacle, what a scene! At the first resurrection, all came forth in immortal bloom, but at the second, the marks of the cursed are visible on all. This is exactly in accordance with the Bible description of the second resurrection. The kings and noblemen of the earth, the mean and the low, the learned and the unlearned came forth together. All behold the Son of Man, and those very men who despised and mocked him, who put the crown of thorns upon his sacred brow, and smote him with a reed, behold him in all his kingly majesty. Those who spit upon him in the hour of his trial now turn from his piercing gaze and from the glory of his countenance. Those who drove the nails through his hands and feet now look upon the marks of his crucifixion. Those who thrust the spear into his side behold the marks of their cruelty on his body, and they know that he is the very one whom they crucified and derided in his expiring agony. And then there arises one long protracted wail of agony, and they flee to hide from the presence of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. All are seeking to hide in the rocks to shield themselves from the terrible glory of him whom they once despised. And overwhelmed and pained with his majesty and exceeding glory, they with one accord raise their voices with terrible distinctness, exclaim, "Blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord." Now what happens next? Then Jesus and the holy angels, accompanied by all the saints, went again to the city. And the bitter lamentations and wailings of the doomed wicked filled the air. Then I saw that Satan again commenced his work. So here is a time again where he's going to try and wrest the government of God from him. And that period that he was warring against God is exactly 6,000 years, according to that previous statement. He passed around amongst his subjects and made the weak and feeble strong, and told them that he and his angels were powerful. He pointed to the countless millions who had been raised. There were mighty warriors and kings who were well skilled in battle, who had conquered kingdoms. And there were mighty giants and valiant men who had never lost a battle. There was the proud, ambitious Napoleon, whose approach had caused the kingdoms to tremble. There stood men of lofty stature and dignified bearing, who had fallen in battle while thirsting to conquer. As they came forth from their graves, they resumed the current of their thoughts where it ceased in death. They possessed the same desire to conquer which ruled when they fell. Satan consults with his angels, and then with those kings and conquerors and mighty men. Then he looks over the vast army and tells them that the company in the city is small and feeble, and that they can go up and take it and cast out its inhabitants and possess his riches and glory themselves. Satan succeeds in deceiving them, and all immediately begin to prepare themselves for battle. There are many skillful men in that vast army, and they construct all kinds of implements of war. That takes time. What kind of weapons will they construct? Will they construct swords? Or are there men of genius who might construct even nuclear weapons to try and take on this enemy? Then with Satan at the head, the multitude move on. Kings and warriors follow close after Satan, and the multitude follow after in companies. Each company has its leader, and order is observed as they march over the broken surface of the earth to the holy city. My question is, how long does it take him to organize this vast army, to put it into companies, to appoint the leaders, to construct the weapons of war that will be necessary for such a cosmic battle,